So we're on page 3B2. So the discussion that we are in is at the conclusion of a long set of steps in a thought process that Rava was presenting, where he was trying to sort out how to balance competing obligations, right? That you might come across, and this followed from our discussion about how important reading the Megillah is, and reading the Megillah is so important that it knocks off all these very important obligations, such as the priests in the temple. They're supposed to be doing their temple service. No, if they haven't heard the Megillah yet, they have to drop everything and listen to the Megillah. Same thing with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. We just talked about him in the Pirkei Avot session, that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and his scholars had to drop everything on Purim, even though they were working on the Mishnah. No, stop producing this life-changing document for the entire people of Israel for the rest of history. Stop that and go and listen to the reading of the Megillah. So the Megillah is important. And then finally he says, wait a second, but there's one scenario that, and we're not going to go over all of the back and forth again, one scenario where I'm not sure. What's the deal if we have the competition is between reading Megillah, listening to the Megillah, and burying an unattended human being? Somebody who is there, somebody who is lying there in front of us, and nobody else is taking care of this person to be buried. And do we have to bury the person if that means missing reading Megillah? Should we do that first? Or do we say, no, let the person lie there, let's go listen to the Megillah, and then we'll come back and we'll take care of it later? So this was his quandary. And we left it off at the very end of his discussion, at the top of 3B2, the right-hand column, where the Talmud, which it doesn't often do, the Talmud comes out of the practical examples and actually conceptualizes the question for us, which is something that was subsequently very important in Talmudic study. But in the Talmud itself, the Talmud tends to keep things pretty concrete. And then we have to try to extrapolate from the concrete examples what the concepts are that the Talmud is struggling with. But here the Talmud comes up straight forwardly and says, the conflict here, the question we have before us is, it's actually the last lines at the bottom of the left-hand column. Do we say that Megillah reading takes precedence because it publicizes the miracle God performed for us on Purim? Right? Megillah adif mishum pirsumei nisa. Megillah is is to be prioritized because we want to publicize God's miracle. Or perhaps, and this is now at the top of the right-hand column, or perhaps burying an unattended corpse takes precedence because human dignity is at stake. So here we have the generalization and the conceptualization that is in conflict. Is it the publicizing of God's miraculous activities, or is it to give human dignity its due? This is the conflict. Which one comes first when they butt into each other? So we left it at the time with a little bit of a question of what exactly are. Let's try to conceptualize the concepts. What exactly are we thinking is so precious about each of these two things, and what does it mean to say that we want to give human dignity its due? What does it mean when we say we want to publicize God's miracles? The first part of it, Persumi Nisa, is a term that is used again and again in the Talmud, referring both to Purim and to Hanukkah. If you think about the Torah itself, the Torah records many miracles, right? The Torah, takes miracles almost as being unmiraculous. It's just a matter of the way things go. God is God, and God does whatever God wants. So there are all kinds of supernaturally natural events that are recorded in the Torah, splitting the Red Sea, right? We have commandments in the Torah, right? Keep Shabbat. Remember that we came out of Egypt. Do we ever have a statement in the Torah, publicize God's miracles? Tell everybody about all the miracles that God has performed. So the answer is no. Okay, the answer is no, but that's too simple an answer. What the Talmud is convinced of is that value and that imperative to publicize God's miracles is obvious, right? That's what the Talmud is saying here. This is obviously one of the great values, one of the great imperatives that we need to honor. So how does the Talmud get that? How does the Talmud extrapolate from Jewish tradition that pirsume nisa, that publicizing the miracle, is a value at all, or certainly, and not only a value at all, but it's a primary value. It's like a basic, super important value in Judaism. And it's unsaid in any explicit form until we get to this kind of discussion, much later in Jewish tradition. So how does the Talmud know that it's so fundamental?
So, yeah, I mean, there is a repetitive theme about God who brought us out of the land of Israel. So there's a pattern of situating our relationship with God in terms of miracles that he performed. So that might be one thing.
Okay, any specific miracles?
Well, specifically miracles associated with taking us out of Egypt. Right.
Good. So the Egypt paradigm is pretty basic to Jewish tradition. So many things that we do, we tag onto it. This is in remembrance of going out of Egypt, right? Zeicher l'tziat Mitzrayim. So for instance, Shabbat, when we make Kiddush, we say that we're making Kiddush and we're honoring Shabbat as a remembrance of going out of Egypt, which is not obvious, right? Where there are two places where we have the Ten Commandments, where the Shabbat observance is commanded to us, and it tells us, "I'm the God, who took you out of Egypt." That's the first, introduction that God says when God does the Ten Commandments. But then God says, "Remember Shabbos because that's the way I created the world." Only in the second text, in the second set, do we say, "Well, this is just the way God commanded you, and it's important to think about it in a kind of an interpersonal way about keeping your slaves free as well." There's Shabbat is this cosmic concept, and yet it's brought very much down to earth as being a remembrance of God taking us out of Egypt. But even again, we're a little bit reviewing some of the stuff that I mentioned before in the Pirkei Avot class. When we say Zeicher l'tziat Mitzrayim, in remembrance of leaving Egypt, of course God is not mentioned there, right? It doesn't say in remembrance of God taking us out of Egypt. We do say that in the Haggadah. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and then God took us out. And if God hadn't taken us out, we'd still be slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt into the foreseeable future, forever and ever. So, of course, it is God that we're thanking, but it's kind of taken for granted. We mentioned that phrase before. It's an assumption that we see God wherever we go. When God is involved in the process of the 10 plagues, God says, "I'm doing this in order for you to then be able to keep on telling people about this." Not only are we commanded to do the Haggadah, to do the telling right at the moment of the Exodus as part of the Passover story, But God says this whole process of all of these miracles that I'm performing is so that you shall tell the world and that people will know my name. That's the fight with Pharaoh. Pharaoh goes, I don't know who this God is. I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm God, right? So, or the other, zillion gods that the Egyptians worship, they're the gods. And the getting out of Egypt was, in a fundamental way, a process of trying to educate not only the Jewish people, but by extension, Egypt and then the rest of the world, by telling this story that God is the majestic ruler of the universe, that God is really, in some sense, above nature and therefore in control of nature, that God's greatness is beyond anything that we can conceive of. We have a psalm that the rabbis decided we should recite 3 times a day. There's no other prayer that we need to recite 3 times a day. Even the Shema, we recite it twice a day. I mean, there are customs to recite it when you go to bed and so on, but those are not commanded by the sages. The sages commanded us to recite a certain prayer, a certain psalm, 3 times a day. What psalm is that? Ashrei.
Ashrei.
Ashrei is the rabbi's favorite psalm. They say this is a psalm that you should say morning, noon, and night. Well, not morning, you recite it, and then again in the afternoon. Why am I saying 3 times? Am I wrong? Wait a second. Twice. In the morning you say Ashrei. No, you say in the morning you say Ashrei twice, and then in the afternoon you say Ashrei again. Right? In the morning you say Ashrei as part of Psukei de Zimra, and then you say Ashrei at the conclusion of the service, after the Amidah, after the other prayers. So they wanted Ashrei to be recited again and again. Why? The answer is because the whole content of Ashrei is how good it is to praise God. How good it is that we're going to be able to thank God for all of the miracles that God has done, all of the blessings that God has showered upon us. Everybody does this. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. And we will too. Right? Va'anachnu. At the end, we say, and we're going to join in with everybody else. So the whole Ashrei, the Aleph Bet of Ashrei, is the letters praise God, the world praises God, nature praises God, everybody's praising God, and it's great to praise God. It feels good to do that. And then we praise God. In the prayer for gratitude, the blessing for gratitude, in the Amidah, the weekly and anytime, actually, the prayer for gratitude is something that we recite on Shabbat, on weekdays, on Rosh Hashanah. The prayer for gratitude says, the end of it, first of it is, we thank you for all of the miracles that you do for us. And at the end, it says, and for all of these, we thank you again with the conclusion, and let everybody thank you. And it is so good to thank you, right? Hatov shimcha ulecha na'eh lahodot. Your name is the good one, and it is so pleasant to say thank you to you. So the idea of praising God out of awe, reverence, and thankfulness was basic to the rabbi's picture of what Judaism is about, extrapolating it from that foundational story where God says, I'm taking you out of Egypt to say thank you. I'm taking you out of Egypt to be able to tell this story. Remember all the way back with Abraham, God says to God's self, I must share with Abraham what I'm about to do, because otherwise Abraham, this is by Sodom, when God is going to destroy Sodom, God says, if I don't explain it, how is Abraham going to continue to tell my story? How is Abraham going to continue to teach the world, teach the people in his household, and by extension, everybody? It's not just his blood kin. Everybody, how is he going to teach them that I am a good God? The answer is I'm going to have to explain myself here. I'm going to have to share what I'm doing. So this is a thread that goes through both legal and also theological and sociological building blocks of Jewish tradition. So what the rabbis do is they end up sharpening it. They end up codifying it. They end up giving it a name. But what they're saying is this is really everything that we're doing. Everything that we're doing is that kind of publicizing of a miracle. We don't always think about it that way. We think about it very much in a much more secularized kind of way, a much more down-to-earth kind of way. But that's the way they thought of it. When we, for instance, have a sandwich and we make a blessing over eating the sandwich and we say, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, we say, thank you, God, you make this miracle that bread can come out of the earth. Has anybody ever seen bread come out of the earth? And yet, that's what we say. We say it's based on the Psalm 104, which, as I've said many times, is such a beautiful psalm. It's the psalm that we say on Rosh Chodesh, and again celebrates. Let my soul praise God. Baruchi nafshi et Hashem. Let my soul praise God, and then it goes through all of a picture of the entire world from creation until the whole nature of and all the creatures have their own place, and the human being. And you, lahotzi lechem min haaretz, God, you create all of these mechanisms that will bring bread out of the earth. So it's put into a miraculous perspective. When we make those blessings, we're supposed to be reminding ourselves, this is not just something that I got from Fresh Direct, it's something that I got from God. So all of that is bundled together, and then it becomes, for the rabbis, the main justification for creating a new holiday, the new holiday of Hanukkah, the new holiday of Purim, that are not in the 5 books of Moses. Why should we be able to create this? What kind of presumptuousness is this? We've talked about this many, many, many times. And that's part of the whole tractate of Megillah is animated by this concern and by this understanding. And that's what their answer is. This is a fundamental fulfillment of a Torah meta value. It's a meta value, a value that is over and above all of the expressed, detailed values that are mentioned in the Torah. So now let's go the other way. When we talk about human dignity, do we have a commandment anywhere explicitly spoken in the Torah? You shall respect human dignity. You shall give each human being their due as their right of human dignity. Is that ever mentioned anywhere in the Torah? So let me answer real quickly. No. Same thing, right? However, if we look at various places, stories in the Torah, we might be able again to extrapolate some of that. Right? One of the arguments that I've made more than once for the importance of the Torah starting from Bereshit. Rather, why does the Torah always tell these stories? Right? So the stories, why not just get down to the nitty-gritty? Let's start with our national history and with the laws that define us. The answer is those stories are implicitly about the importance of humanity. There is one statement that we have again and again at the very beginning of our stories, the story of creation, that human beings are created in God's image. So, One second. Okay. So human dignity could be pegged to that particular statement, and it could be then, expanded. Well, we're all in God's image. Does that mean that we're all angels? That we're all, supremely, perfect spiritual beings, just like God? Well, read the rest of Genesis. Boy, are we a messed up bunch of people, a creature. And yet, the God's insistence is before the flood and after the flood. Even after the flood, even though when God is so distraught about what a terrible mess we've made, God still insists to Noah after the flood, we're all created in God's image. All us, we human beings still continue to be created in God's image. So there is a fundamental quality to human beings that doesn't apply to dogs, no matter how much I love dogs. And it doesn't apply to trees. All of those are magnificent creations of God. But we have something else, that is attached to us. Stuart, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say the idea that we should not do to others what we would have them not do to us is kind of a meta value. It's not quite the same as talking about human dignity, but it's a higher level of generality than we see in most of the mitzvot.
Right. So these are important points. So the idea, for instance, not so much treat, but what we have explicitly in the Torah, love your neighbor as yourself. Right? It's at the heart of the holiness code of how to be a holy person. Right? You be holy because I'm holy. How are you supposed to be holy? Well, one of the ways that you act out holiness and make holiness is by loving the neighbor as yourself. So yes, that's pretty fundamental. That's pretty central. Absolutely. No argument about it. But what I want to do is I want to maybe sharpen the distinction and saying, when we say love your neighbor as yourself, that could still be in a certain sense, a kind of a utilitarian concept. If we don't want this world to fall apart again, if we don't want to have another flood, if we don't want to just kill each other, then we're going to have to learn to live with each other. And we should treat each other nicely, and we should treat each other with consideration, and we need to cut a little slack to each other, and all of that kind of stuff. So there's a practical value to those kinds of mitzvot that we can appreciate. The words kvod habriot, human dignity, to me, they convey something a little different, right? And that's why we ended with this question. I wanted people to think about this a little bit more. Where does human dignity reside? Is human dignity essential to each human being? Or is human dignity something that is socially constructed for the sake of moving along? Yeah, Sarita.
Well, I just wanted to comment on the fact that there are just many places where we're told how to treat and not to treat other people, and in particular, how to treat people who are at a disadvantage. I mean, not putting a block in front of somebody who's blind, and how we treat the orphans and the widows, and making sure that we don't, we're not greedy in taking all of our grain, but leaving some for the poor. So it seems to me that there are many places that suggest that this is something that we have to actively ensure how people are treated, and that is, to me, the basis of considering people and the dignity of all people.
So great. Those are important examples of creating a decent human being and a decent society by abiding by those things. What I want to kind of again push with, I'm thinking, for instance, the New York Times, George Will is I think that's the guy. He's a conservative, pundit. So he reviewed.
He's actually the Washington Post, though, George Will.
No, but he published in the New York Times in the book review section last week a review of some anthology of conservatism.
Yeah,
conservative thinking. Yeah. So he said all kinds of things, whatever he said. And then there were letters to the editor this week in the book review section about his review. And what they pointed out, which, and of course, this is, no secret to anybody that's ever, heard me say one word. I'm not a big fan of conservatism, and in political thought. And what was pointed out again and again in the letters was that, to me, and to the people who are writing the letters, the real problem with conservatism is its disregard of the marginal folks. The people, they're always wanting to conserve the stability of society because they're afraid that society will become chaos and the French Revolution, and everybody's head will be chopped off and so on and so forth. Chaos is not something I'm a fan of. However, their solution to preventing chaos is there's a certain elite, there's a certain power elite, there's a certain economic elite that takes care of everybody else. So you can, and they think of themselves as very moral people. They think of themselves as super good people. William Buckley thought of himself as probably the most moral person in the entire universe, as well as being the most intelligent person in the entire universe. There's a kind of noblesse oblige approach that some people take with regard to that kind of morality, where I will not put a stumbling block in front of the blind. God forbid. What do you think I am? You think I'm just like one of these, other kinds of people? I'm better than that. But the blind doesn't have inherent dignity as a result. The blind is the object of my compassion and mercy and my solicitude. The point of going to a pushing to say no, the reason you don't do that is because the blind person is just as good and just as inherently human as you are. The person of color is just as inherently human as you are. That's not an obvious statement for many people who consider themselves totally Bible abiding and moral people. So that's where I want to push this for us to appreciate that the radical concept of human dignity is beyond what we might simply be satisfied with by following the commandments as they're literally written down. It goes beyond that. It really derives from those commandments a different proposition, which is not easy for people to wrap their minds around sometimes. So all right. First, Stuart raised his hand, then back to Sarita. Yeah, good.
So you characterize the loving your neighbor as kind of reciprocal, way to keep society in order. And if we just go with that for a moment, I mean, there's something distinctive about this particular obligation that we owe to unattended corpses, right? Because that's an example of the person whom we're burying there is no reciprocal relationship there. This is somebody who is dead. And so our obligation to them is sort of purer in a sense, because we can't expect anything in return, which we do even from the poor, because, it may be that I'll lose my shirt in the stock market and I'm going to be on the food line next time. But when you're dead, you're dead. And that obligation is truly what philosophers call deontological. It's not it's not utility based. It's just based on a pure duty to the dead.
Excellent. That's many times unfortunately, when I have to preside over a burial, I bring this point up. The rabbis called the burial of a person chesed shel emet, the truest act of loving kindness. But it's not about asking for any reciprocal favor back. It's not, I'll lend you a cup of sugar because next week I may need an egg and borrow it from you, right? This is about just pure taking care of a totally defenseless, helpless, dead human being, right? They don't even know that you're doing it for them. Right?
Rabbi?
Yeah. Wait. Sarita was ahead of you.
Oh, Sarita.
Go.
Okay. So back to what you were talking about. There was a times a week, or maybe it was just a week ago, David Brooks had an opinion piece about the source of inequality is you, and really was about our mindset and about reflecting and understanding our own privilege, so that those of us who are privileged and who have access to education and books and what have you, to be aware how that is so much tied into our privilege, and not look down on other people who don't have those, and think, oh, those people, they don't promote their kids reading. Well, that is part of what happens for people who are environments and have been brought up in a very other world to what we live in. So I was thinking about this notion of human dignity. I mean, in some sense, starts with recognizing what we have and our privilege, that is not because we have done such great things. It's just the luck of the draw in some ways. And so if we keep that in mind, we won't look down on people who don't have the privileges that we have.
Good. Josie, yes, thank you.
I'm thinking of that importance of love your neighbor as yourself. Could that be related to the fact that God loves us, even though we fail a lot of the time? And if God can love his people, then we should be able to love other people, even if they don't measure up to what we think is the best way to be.
Right. Beautiful. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. There's a, hold on, Nick, for a second. And then Geraldine. When there's a Rabbi Moshe Cordovero was a great 16th century mystic and also ethical thinker. And he says something very simple. He says, try, and of course this is, look, I'm human. I'm human just like everybody else here. I've got my resentments. I get angry. I get ticked off. I have, struggles with dealing with this person or that person, or, look at how terrible I am with regard to conservatives. I somehow just find it hard to love them. And I should be better at all that stuff. So I have to try to remind myself. But he says something very simple. He says, God lets the sun shine on bad people and on good people equally. Right? From his religious perspective, all of nature, all of everything around us, the air, the sun, these are God's gifts. God is showering down upon us every second these life-giving blessings. And God is not saying, I'm only going to give this life-giving blessing to the good people. I'm not going to give it to the evil people, right? So yes, in that kind of sense, we need to take that to heart, and like you say, and try to be loving, at least at some kind of baseline. It doesn't mean love terrible things. It doesn't mean go along with terrible things. It doesn't mean go along with a corrupt and broken society. But it means to recognize that there's a humanity that is the basis, and that can be hijacked, or that can be manipulated out of real human needs and fears, and go into the wrong place. Just like I can go into the wrong place, other people can possibly go into the wrong place, and take it with a kind of a little bit of humility. Absolutely, something that's an ongoing challenge for each and every one of us. Yeah, Nick.
We're getting back to the original question that the rabbis pose about the conflict between this human dignity and the Haggadah. Isn't this also come back to the whole choose life issue? I mean, we have the human dignity, a life lived, but then we have the story, our story, which is the story of our being alive, our ability to continue to be alive. So I don't know, I would think that the choice would be to choose life and therefore read the Haggadah.
Not the Haggadah, the Megillah.
I'm sorry, the Megillah.
Okay, so let's see whether you're right or wrong. In another little bit, another maybe month or two after we finish this discussion, then we'll see whether you're right or not, or at least whether the Gemara agrees with you. Geraldine.
I'm involved with the 929, and continually the people go against God's word, and God continually repeats over and over again, if you come back to me, I forgive you, no matter what you do.
Right. And this, of course, is the great theme on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right?
Yeah.
Till the last moment of a person's life, God is waiting, waiting, waiting. Maybe you'll turn yourself around. Maybe you'll turn yourself around.
And it's okay if you wait until then, but as long as you do it.
Right, right. So I want to come back to we'll get to what the resolution of this conflict is in a minute or so. I want to also, I made a kind of a distinction between social construct and essential roots for conceiving of human dignity, but they're actually definitely connected. When we think about human dignity, we think about, for instance, that there are people in our world who are given more respect and have, we think, more dignity than other people, right? And in the rabbinic world, that was the case also. A Talmud scholar was given more dignity than an ignoramus, right? Kings and queens are treated with more dignity than just some plain old subject. We have created hierarchies of dignity that go beyond quote unquote human dignity, which teach us that human dignity is connected to how we treat each other. So going back to Sarita's point, if we don't treat other people with dignity, they may have inherent human dignity, but it is totally violated and ignored. It's like the old question of the tree falling in the forest, right? In what sense does a person have human dignity when their human dignity is stripped from them by society? This, of course, we just had Yom HaShoah last week. That was one of the important agendas of the Nazis, Yamach Shemam, and that's the agenda of every totalitarian regime, is to undermine the sense that everybody has human dignity, that everybody as a human being per se, without having to earn it, without having to pledge allegiance, without having to do whatever kind of, meet any kind of standard, that the person has human dignity per se. That is something that we, if we don't act on it, it gets trampled, and then it just becomes an abstraction. When we talk about people who are incarcerated, we throw people in jail, and then we decide that, if they deserve it, or we decide that they deserve it, if they're in jail, they must deserve it. It's a kind of a Calvinist idea. So then all of a sudden they don't deserve to be treated like a real human being. We are privileged. How much, of a sense of degradation do we feel when we all of a sudden don't get our way in the way that we're used to, right? That the foods we want to eat, the routines that we have to follow, that if we have to wait and listen to somebody else tell us when or what we're going to be able to, we're entitled to get, or something like that. We have a tremendous sense of entitlement because we have endowed ourselves with a real big, gigantic sense of human dignity, but we don't, necessarily give that to anybody else.
So I wanted to follow up. So I also, one of the issues is that when people are treated by people with more power, with a lack of dignity, that becomes internalized, and people don't recognize their own inherent dignity and their own value, so that's really important. And also we talk about, with teaching, we talk about the self-fulfilling prophecy, that if you look at somebody else like they are incapable of achieving, then guess what? They internalize that and they become incapable of achieving. And so human dignity can easily be stripped from people by how they are treated by other people. And so it becomes incumbent on us to safeguard that in how we treat other people.
Right. So that was like the big battle. I've mentioned his name more than once. Viktor Frankl was a real teacher about the resistance that a person must put up to not let that happen to them. right? That this is what you're saying is so pernicious and so powerfully possible. And that was he was in the camps, and he was saying that was the whole raison d'etre of each person every day, not to let them take my own consciousness of my own dignity away from me. That if you have the wherewithal to remind yourself and to keep on reinforcing for yourself, I am of precious value, no matter what they say, no matter what they do to me, no matter what they surround me with. If you can do that, it's a valiant battle. Not everybody succeeds, but it's the only way to maintain that. And that's why it's so poignant what Stuart was mentioning before, what our Gemara's take. The case that we're dealing with is where the person is dead. They can no longer reinforce their own sense of human dignity internally. Their consciousness is finished. So this is where the consciousness redounds back to us. Do we endow that piece of flesh, that dead flesh in front of us, that dead piece of meat? Do we endow it with human dignity or not? Right? So it then comes right back to us. I want to editorialize just for a second. Some of you followed that right before Pesach, the town council of Montclair passed an ordinance that established rent control. Finally, in this town, after over a generation of fighting about it, and referendums, popular votes were put up a couple of times in this town and were defeated. The town voted, those people that went out to vote, voted against establishing rent control in Montclair. Now, there are all kinds of details that need to be worked out in any decent, law about rent control. And guess what? Even to me, landlords are human and have human dignity and should be treated fairly. Absolutely, no question about it. However, that doesn't relate to the reality that we're living in, where people who rent are at the mercy of any arbitrary decision that a landlord makes with regard to how much rent to charge. And we see that over and over again. We've seen it for a generation. We've seen, beloved stores close down because all of a sudden the landlord decided to hike up the rent twice as much, and they can't meet it that way. And then everything that we see that we love, that little restaurant, that little shoemaker, whatever it is, all of a sudden there goes the neighborhood. And the answer is, well, that's too bad. That's the free market. The people that have power, the people that have money will live here, and the other people, let them go find someplace else to live. This is a total violation of a perspective of endowing every single person with human dignity. It puts private property as the primary value, and it puts human dignity as a much secondary value. Pure and simple. That ordinance has now been put on hold because the landlord association in Montclair has gotten the court injunction to stop the ordinance from going into effect. And it's imperative for us at this point in our lives, with everything that's going around us, with the fact that none of us can actually go sit in the same room with the other person because of the dangers that poses, but it's because we're interconnected. It's because we're actually humanly contagious to each other. And the attempt by somebody to isolate themselves in that kind of way and say, no, I'm going to be able to control my property, and the heck with you, is against anything and everything that we should be learning from our present reality. So does a landlord have the entitlement to make a living? Of course, but that's not the same thing as being the lord and master of everybody else that needs a place to live. So, and one of the things that we're supposedly, hopefully, waking up to is that the person that delivers the groceries to us is now a hero. Of course, we shouldn't pay them minimum wage, but they're a hero, right? If they're a tenant, then let them get thrown out if they can't pay their rent, or if they can't pay the rent rise. It can't be both ways. It cannot be they're a hero because they give my sense of entitlement reinforcement. They give me my luxuries, and therefore I don't have to grovel and I don't have to endanger myself. So what a hero they are. It can't be all about whether they're good for me. Human dignity, it makes a bigger claim than that. And either we wake up to this, or between global warming and all of the rest of the kind of inequalities that we're creating, we're going to be dead. So I've said it before, and I'm going to keep on saying it, because apparently we really don't seem to have created a tidal wave of consciousness to that effect. All right, so let's cut to the chase. What's the answer to this conflict between these two values? So we're on the third, well, in the Hebrew, it's on the third line. On the fourth line, top of the left-hand column, of the right-hand column, 3b2, after posing. So I'd like to ask somebody to please read. Okay, Bill, go for it.
Yeah, occasionally there might be a bird in the background. I'll try to mute it as soon as I finish reading. After posing the question, Rava himself answered it. Attending to an unattended corpse takes precedence. For Master said, human dignity is so great that it even suspends a prohibition of the Torah. Accordingly, it certainly overrides the positive rabbinical obligation of Megillah reading.
Nick, you're wrong. There it is. Okay, so what the Talmud, and very rarely does this happen. Most of the time, the Talmud just poses questions and goes around in circles. But here we have a resolution to this problem. And what's also a little bit unique is that it's the same man, Rava, who poses the problem. And then the Talmud reports, and after he couldn't figure it out, he ended up finally figuring it out himself. Now, what does he figure? How does he figure it out? So the answer, just to make it really clear, and we'll come back to it to unpack it a little bit more, the answer is human dignity overrides the obligation to tell God's miracles. Okay? Example of telling God's miracles, the Megillah. Example of treating every human being with dignity, burying this corpse. So those are the technical details to those big values. And the answer is that respecting human dignity, treating each human being with dignity, is an ultimate value that overrides, it even suspends prohibitions of the Torah. So this is Gadol Kvod Habriot, Shedoche et Lo Ta'aseh Shabbat Torah. So, how do we know this? Remember, he first posed it as, hey, this is a really big conundrum. I've got this really important value. I've got this really important value, right? So in the end, what's the straw that tips the scales? To mix metaphors here? What's the way that he actually comes to a conclusion and decides between these two? How does he do that? The answer is he cites a tradition. He cites a tradition. The Amar Mar, some unnamed authority, an anonymous sage that everybody seems to recognize, has said this statement, and we accept it. So let's take this to heart also. What he is saying is, this is a bit of, cultural wisdom of the Jewish people that has been, said by our great avot, our great ethical masters, our teachers, the people who know what counts and what doesn't count, and they have taught us this set of priorities. So even though intellectually I wasn't able to get myself out of this struggle, it seemed like I was putting myself into basically a draw. I couldn't decide one way or the other. The answer then is, did God come down from heaven and tell me? No. Mar, the master. Who's the master? I want to throw back. I know I'm doing this as a kind of just as a kind of facetious thing, but the master, guess what, is a human being. And look what the human being says. That human beings come first. Looks like there's a little bit of an agenda here, right? Human beings. What a surprise that human beings decided that human beings come first. But that's the wisdom of this decision. What they are saying in full confidence that God agrees is that this is Torah. That the Torah's teaching is that God is saying, if you have to make a decision, which comes first? Praising me or taking care of a human being who needs to be taken care of? I'll wait. You can praise me later. Take care of this human being. Take care of the human dignity first. And then there's no question, of course, I want you to praise me, and that's important. It's a mitzvah. It's a fundamental mitzvah. It's a meta mitzvah, but it comes second. So this is a radical, very, very, very strong statement. And that's, I'm glad that Nick said what he said, because we shouldn't take this for granted. And not only that, there are many human beings who would not take it for granted. There are many religiously committed people who would say the opposite. No, of course God comes first. And we say that God comes first most of the time, right? Most of the time, God comes first. You really, really, would love to eat that lobster. It's too bad. God says you can't, right? So, we're talking here about, the run-of-the-mill stuff. God comes first. Suffuse your order of priorities of the way you live. The living that you need to do needs to be suffused with God consciousness. But then there comes some kind of fundamental issues where God gave us our humanity, and in a certain sense, then honoring human dignity is honoring God, because God put us here. God put us here to turn your argument, Nick, on its head. God put us here not to destroy ourselves in the name of God. God put us here in order for us to be able to recognize the God in each one of us.
Rabbi Gandhi was supposed to have said that if you don't...
Who said?
Gandhi.
Yeah.
Gandhi. If you don't see God in the next person you meet, there's no point in looking any further.
Interesting.
Okay. All right. Pretty stark statement. Yeah. Sarita, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. So I was thinking too that, when you think about human dignity and the kinds of things that we need to do, they're time sensitive. They have to be done now. God's there all the time. And so what's good to know for us is that God's willing to wait. You know what? I'll still be here. Take care of what needs to be taken care of now to help other people and to give that dignity. And I'll still be here. So that's one thing I thought I had. The other thought I have is going back to why when we gave sacrifices, did we give sacrifices? I mean, it's not like God needed to eat. It's not like God, that God likes the smell, but it's not like it's so necessary for God. Who are we doing that for? We're doing that really for us, so that we maintain that awareness of God's presence. And the same then, is true here when we praise God. Yeah, God likes to hear that, but are we doing that for God, or are we doing that because that also does something for us in terms of maintaining our own human dignity and our awareness of God?
Okay.
Rabbi?
Who said that?
David
Hey,
Cannon.
Go ahead.
To my way of thinking, it elevates the burial of an abandoned corpse to the level of an emergency.
Right. Well, and again,
if the house is on fire, you don't read Megillah. If you find an abandoned corpse, you don't read Megillah.
So that word is an interesting word, emergency. When do we consider something an emergency and when not? When we just had, I mean, that's part of our whole challenge now with the virus, our response to the virus. So when a person goes to the store and buys 80 rolls of toilet paper, is that because it's an emergency, right? Well, no. I mean, how much do we extend that sense of emergency? The corpse is lying there and it's not buried. Well, okay, I'll bury it tomorrow. How many times have families decided, well, until my child can fly in from Timbuktu, we're going to wait for the burial. Burials wait sometimes. So it's a tricky thing. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong. What I'm saying is that it's a tricky thing to determine when is it an emergency and when not. We can create all kinds of senses of emergency. And I wanted to bring this up. I'll just, when we say that human dignity comes first, but then we need to still figure out the balance. I put simple kinds of decisions that we make in our community all the time. Somebody is going to celebrate their bar mitzvah or their bat mitzvah. Well, they got to look good. It would be very undignified for them not to look good at the celebration. So, do they go and buy their shoes or get their hair done on Shabbos so that they can look good? So which one comes first? Is that a human dignity issue that overrides God's glory? So the answer comes back to the emergency thing. It's about timing also. It's about, well, no, but if I don't do my hair, that morning, it's going to flop. I understand, I sympathize, but guess what? There are ways to maintain human dignity that honor God. So we have to figure out when is it entitlement and when is it dignity.
Wait,
one second. When is it an emergency and when isn't it an emergency? How do we construct a routine or a set of priorities where we honor what needs to be honored? Yeah, Jen.
It's just a stupid question. We're not allowed to do our hair on Shabbat. I don't understand.
You're not allowed to go to the hairdresser and.
Well, you can't go to a hairdresser, but you can do your hair at home. I mean, right?
It depends what you're doing to do it. But I need my hair cut. No, you can't cut your hair on Shabbat. So these are I'm using that with all of the. Yes, there are many things you can do on Shabbat that are fine. I put on a suit to look good up on Shabbat, or a jacket and a tie. One of the few people in Shomrei that does that. So yes, I'm certainly attuned to the idea that you shouldn't just look like a total schlump. But yes, that should be your part of your questions. What can I do on Shabbat, and when do I have to do on Friday afternoon?
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Right, Nick.
I have a question. I'm trying to think of what I was thinking of as a precedent for the case I presented, and I think it had something to do with what takes precedence, a wedding or a funeral or something like that. Do the rabbis say something about that?
Yes, they do. The wedding takes precedence, but the shiva takes precedence over the celebration of the wedding. Right, so it goes backwards. If you have a funeral procession and you have a wedding procession that bump into each other at the road, who has to give way to who? So the wedding procession goes first, but then after the burial, you don't go and celebrate at the party of the wedding. You go to the shiva house. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, Natalie, you have to unmute yourself. You didn't unmute yourself. You gotta at the bottom of your screen, you gotta touch the microphone icon. When you take the cursor on your screen and go down to the bottom, a white band should come up no. You took away your picture. You didn't take away your sound. There's a picture of a microphone. All right, what can I tell you? I can't do it for you. No, you're mute. You have to unmute. When you go to the bottom of your screen, it's in the middle of the white band, and it's the left hand. There are three things. There's a microphone icon, a telephone icon, and a camera icon. Yep. No, you keep doing the camera. All right, we'll come back to you when you can, okay?
How about now?
Did it. Yay!
Okay. I'm thinking of the word immediacy. We just had Bruce's cousin die last week, and we were making the calls. They had a Zoom Shiva, a Zoom funeral Wednesday evening, and a Zoom Shiva Friday afternoon. And we were calling people to tell about this, and most people were, very good. One person said, "Oh, I won't be able to make that. I have a class that time," and it's the immediacy. When somebody dies, I'm a big person that feels like you should call. All of this texting and emails and even sending the notes, it's all good. It's all very wonderful, but there's nothing like hearing somebody's voice speaking to you. To me, that's the thing that really is important. So I wasn't able to go, obviously, to the schmooze because we had the Zoom funeral, which actually was absolutely really a wonderful, wonderful thing. And the Zoom Shiva the next day, where everybody shared their thoughts, was better than being in somebody's home, because in somebody's home, you're not really hearing what everybody else is saying to the person. We got all the stories and everything. And it's just, it's the immediacy. And these people were so appreciative of seeing everybody's face and hearing everybody's voice. It was just wonderful. And I don't know, you can't see me now, or can you?
No, you took away the camera.
I don't know how I do this. It's beyond me.
You just click. You
On
click
the
the
camera?
camera icon. There you go.
Oh my God.
Now I
I'm
can
on
see.
my iPhone. That's why it's
Oh,
not.
then I don't know anything. Then I
That's why
know
it's
nothing.
not going to do that again. I'm going to go on the other thing next time. But
All right.
but obviously, the people who are in mourning, those are the important people right now that you have to take care of. You can't do that another time. You have to do that now, and then you take care of everything else. And you pray to God afterwards. You're praying during it. I think God is with you when you're at the unattended corpse also, which now I understand they can't really be that much at the unattended corpse. They're having a problem with that, right? Washing all the water.
These are very, very difficult times, and treating the corpse with dignity is we've developed beautiful traditions that now unfortunately have to be put in abeyance, and this is a big struggle for a lot of people. Everything that you're talking about now is something that each person has to struggle with, and as a society we'll see what happens when we finally, God willing, hopefully soon, get back out again and start putting the pieces back together again. We'll see how much our priorities have changed, how much our sense of technology has changed the way we think of how we communicate with each other. I have no idea. I'm not one of those futurologists. I don't know whether everything will just be forgotten or whether people will actually make adjustments for good or for bad. I have no idea. But yes, these are the challenges that we're being confronted with. All right, I'm going to ask you, Natalie, to mute your
try to
mic again. Just click that. There, you did it. Perfect. However you did it. Great. So we still have a couple of minutes. So we're going to move on from that discussion. And now we're going to go back into some of the nitty-gritty about laws having to do with where and when you read the Megillah. Oh, before we do that, actually, I wanted to make just one statement about this decision, and that is, I tried to convey how radical and how strong this message is in our sugya, right? The Talmudic discussion that we just went through over the last couple of sessions. This is such a strong statement that in other parts of the Talmud, it has been conditioned and weakened. So when you follow this same discussion, for instance, in Tractate Brachot, it gets chopped down and whittled down and weakened and limited in significant ways, so that this ringing declaration that human dignity is the priority over all priorities ends up actually not being true. And that became the overriding approach in later halacha and later tradition, that human dignity is, yes, it's a factor, but it is not the overriding factor. So the kind of religious impulse that people have had has actually pushed back against this kind of, literally humanist proposition, and made it a much weaker proposition. But it's not here in this statement. And this is when you try to start studying the Talmud in a more, what can I say, synaptic way, where you start putting together this discussion in one part of the Talmud with this discussion in another part of the Talmud, then you start seeing that this conversation got very complicated and ended up with this voice getting overruled. So for better or for worse. Okay. Now we're going to be able to do just a couple of more lines. And Bill, you're the reader for today. Thank you.
The Gemara elaborates on a ruling that was touched upon previously. The text of the ruling, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, "A walled city, as well as everything that is near it, and everything that can be seen with it, is treated as a walled city. Not only does the walled city itself celebrate Purim on the 15th, but so do all the open towns and settlements around it."
Okay, so if you look at note 27.
Note 27, the Gemara above to be defined near as within 1 mil.
1 mil is approximately what a person, an average person, can walk in 18 minutes, right? Same time frame like for matzah. So back there we said that when we said that a walled city reads the Megillah on the 15th and everybody else reads on the 14th, right? So the Gemara then said, well, it's not just the walled city, it's the walled city and its environs, right? And its general area. The walled city, is the center for of an expanded area. Everything near it, right? So now what is added besides everything near it is, and everything that can be seen with it, right? That if you go to the ramparts of the walled city and you look out, can you see some other village or some other settlement from there? And that may be more than the 18-minute walking distance. So we have here two different criteria. The Gemara is going to try then to see how do we apply both of them together when they're not identical. Oh, and look, and here's our little teddy bear. Our teddy bear is joining us in the discussion. Thank you, Beryl. So so we have these two criteria. The walled city is not just what was in the walls, but also we go beyond it in terms of a certain set distance, and then the visuals come in. Okay? Now we try to clarify that. The rule is clarified.
The rule is clarified further. A Tana taught, an open town that is near a walled city is treated as a walled city, even though it cannot be seen from the city. An open town that can be seen from a walled city is treated as a walled city, even though it is not near the city.
Okay. So here's where the Gemara sort of puts out its first sense of reconciling these two. And the reconciling is to be expansive, right? Whatever criterion includes something that the other criterion doesn't include, we include it. So if something cannot be seen, but it's really close, and the Gemara is going to ask, how could that be? And the Gemara will give you a simple answer. We'll get to that next time. So, but theoretically, if it's close enough, even though you can't see it, it's hiding behind a bunch of trees or something, it doesn't matter. Nevertheless, if it's within that proximity, it's under the date of the walled city. And the other way, even if it's really far away, but it's a clear day, so you can see forever, then if you can see that town, then that town is considered connected to the walled city, and that town reads the Megillah at the same date as the walled city on the 15th. Okay, we're going to stop here, and we'll get into more of those discussions, God willing, next time.
Can I ask a question, Rabbi?
You just did.
That's your question.
The last time we ended with the fact that unattended body does not have to be Jewish. And we never talked any more about that.
We said that it does not have to be Jewish.
Yeah, but...
Right. So what else is there to talk about? It's human dignity. Human dignity is universal. It's every human being.
Okay.
Right. David Kanigis just wrote a little question. So the statement that Rava quotes, that he applies to our situation, says explicitly that human dignity overrides a prohibition in the Torah. So David says, but we're not talking about prohibitions. We're talking about positive commandments. Reading the Megillah is a positive commandment. Burying the dead is a positive commandment. So what's the connection? What's the application here? Right? Good question. Right? Good question. The answer is that over and over again, the Talmud understands that not doing a positive obligation is less serious than violating a prohibition. Right? So for instance, famous example, we don't blow shofar when Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos. So why? There's a positive commandment to blow shofar. On Rosh Hashanah, you're supposed to blow shofar. The answer is that we're afraid that if we blow shofar, it will lead to breaking Shabbos. Somebody will carry the shofar to the next person or to the shul or to where, and you're not allowed to carry. And that carrying is a biblical prohibition. So the prohibition, not to violate a prohibition, is more serious than not to do a positive commandment. That's what's called shev ve'al taseh. If you passively, you sit down and you just don't fulfill your commandment, okay, it's not the best thing in the world, but you haven't committed a sin. It's a sin of omission rather than a sin of commission. So what we have here is that sins of commission are worse than sins of omission. Therefore, the Kal V'chomer that Bill was mentioning, the idea, the argument from the stronger to the weaker. So if Kvod HaBriot overrides prohibitions, then certainly it can make us omit a positive, commandment if that's what's at stake. Okay, David, does that respond? For now, that's what's going to have to be. All right, good.
Yashikar.
Thank you.
All right, and I'm closing the recording.
Stay safe, everybody.
All right, very good.